So I went with the Sinister EGR delete. From what I've heard, they make pretty good quality stuff. So it comes with your instruction manual, a sticker. What you want to do is make sure that you got all the parts there. So it looks like I got 3 zip ties, the coolant line, the main plate, a plate for like I guess an unanodized plate, an anodized plate, a coupler for coolant, a couple coolant hose clamps, some screws, and a bracket. So looks like everything's there. From what I was reading online, almost all of these are the same except for I think the only company that makes one a little bit different is No Limit Fabrication. I bought this before I did a lot of research, but apparently the No Limit Fabrication one has a channel milled here, so coolant can pass through, and apparently it lowers your coolant temperature by like 5 to 10 degrees. But yeah, I already had this ordered and it was already on its way by the time that I read that and did a little bit more research. But this should work fine, so we'll stick with this since I got it. So first step would be to disconnect both batteries, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. The next step is to drain the coolant from the hot and cold side of the radiator. The pictures in this instruction manual aren't very good, but I went online and did a lot of like kind of research on tips and tricks on how to do this, and a lot of people say that it's going to be a lot easier to get to the drain plug if you remove the grille and the front headlight. So to remove the grille, I believe it's these bolts right here. There's the ones right there, 4 bolts, and that is a 10mm socket. So we'll do that. In addition to unscrewing the bolts on the top of the grille, you're going to need a flathead screwdriver, and down here there are clips that you need to press down on with the screwdriver, and then it should just pop right out of place. There's 4 of them, it looks like. Actually 5 clips, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Next step is to remove the headlight, and once again you're going to use a 10mm socket for the bolt on the top of the headlight, and 2 where it was right behind the grille there, so those 2. Trying to pop the headlight off, and I found that there is another, let's see if I can see this here, there's another bolt. I don't know if you can see that at all, lighting's not very great. There's another bolt right underneath the headlight down here. So that was kind of a waste of time, because now that I've got the headlight and the grille off, there's no drain valve, at least on my truck, anywhere. But I did find underneath the truck, there is the drain valve for one side of the radiator, and on the other side of the truck there's another drain valve. So I've got a hose connected to that drain valve going into a bucket. We'll drain the coolant. You have the valve unscrewed, loosen radiator cap and the overflow reservoir cap, and the coolant should start to drain. Step was to unhook the airflow sensor from the intake, and then remove the top intake cover from the tube here, and you have to loosen this up obviously. And there's 4 clips, 1, 2, 3, and 4 clips, and this should push off and just pull out. You should be able to spin that off, set it off to the side, remove the air filter, set it off to the side, and then there is a bolt right here that you use, or that you undo to take out the air box. I don't know if you have to, but I'm going to, because it's 1 bolt, and it should give me a little bit more room. And one of these down here is kind of like a slip coupler or something, so it'll pop out similar to like how the headlight popped out. So I think that should be 8mm. Could be wrong. Gone. We're going to remove the rest of the intake tube, which includes this whole assembly. Simply pop these up. There's a 10mm bolt on the right hand side. You're going to want to loosen this clamp that connects the intake to whatever that is, the turbo inlet, and then pop that out, and then pop these out, and then this should just slide right out, the intake tube. So the next step is to remove this coolant line that runs from the radiator here to the EGR, and then also this coolant line that runs from the EGR down to the bottom of the radiator back here. Now I see why you had to take off the headlight, because in order to get to this, it's going to be a pain in the ass with the headlight on. So loosen up these and get them to where they're on the part of the tube where you can squeeze with your fingers. They should be able to pop right off. So I got those tubes off, but when I disconnected the tube that came from, I believe right here, down to the lower radiator, or to the radiator, I lost a ton of coolant. So I don't know if I didn't drain enough or what, but I put this underneath just to kind of catch what I can, and it turned out to be a good move. So got the tubes off. Next step, I don't even know, we'll have to look at the instructions, to take this barb that's included in the kit and connect this line and this line, because this line right here goes to the EGR cooler, and that's going to be deleted obviously. So take this barb, connect this line and this line. Now these hose clamps weren't provided in the kit, but I had a couple laying around, so after I connected the two hoses with the barb, I figured why not throw them on there. It's not going to hurt anything. So. Say the next step is to install the supplied coolant line from the degas bottle down to the bottom of the radiator where you disconnected, but I think that might be in the way of removing this, so I'm just going to leave it kind of loose. Might put it off to the side over here and connect the bottom later. But now what it wants you to do is disconnect this line with the quick connect down here from the EGR cooler. So we'll go ahead and disconnect this sensor from underneath the turbo inlet, and the directions say to zip tie it away from any hot or potentially hot parts. So I don't think this is going to be used anymore. Now we'll disconnect these from the PCM, or the PCM wires. Basically you just got to pull these tabs and press down, and they will just pop right out. These need to be tucked away somewhere where they're not going to get damaged, or any moisture is going to get in there, because this is your basically your truck's computer. So make sure that you don't mess with those. Zip tie on the center one that you need to cut in order to actually get this out of the way. Disconnected these cables and removed, well, I just pulled up on this, and I didn't actually have to cut the zip tie, it just popped out. So once you remove that, it's time to go to the EGR valve here and remove the orange clip. There should be a black clip somewhere, apparently. Oh, black clip right here, it looks like. And then should be a third one. Oh, this gray one right here is to unplug the vacuum line, and that is where one of the coolant tubes, right behind it, it's this little thing with these little 90 degree connectors, and they want you to cap this with this little rubber thing that they give to you. So I think you got to cut this off. So I'm gonna get away from the instructions and kind of just start pulling this stuff apart, because I have a pretty good idea of what I need to do. If I run into a snag, I'm gonna go ahead and revert back to the instructions, but the pictures in there aren't really super clear. And yeah, anyway, so there's this little black bracket. There's 1, 2, and 3 8mm bolts here. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that up and then pull this thing. Unscrew this sensor, and that's with a 14mm wrench. Be careful, because once it loosens up, it really pops out and you could bang your knuckles on here. After that, I'm going to remove these bolts for the exhaust pieces here and down here. 8mm wrench, and a good piece of advice that I got reading online was to soak these in like liquid wrench or PB blaster a couple times a day, a few days before. So like soak them 2 times a day for 3 or 4 or 5 days, depending on how corroded they look, just to get them off a little bit easier, because sometimes people have issues with these ones actually snapping off, and that's not good. But fortunately for me, my EGR cooler failed at 99,900 miles, so the dealer had to replace this under warranty, and that was like 10,000 miles ago, so these bolts should not be that hard to get out. But I put a bunch of penetrating lube in there, liquid wrench, PB blaster, just to be safe. So that little exhaust pipe at the bottom that people usually break bolts off into came out pretty easy. You're gonna need, I had to use 2 extensions and a little swivelly bendy thing, and still an 8mm socket. Second up exhaust pipe, that went from above the turbo inlet to right there on the, right there rather, on the EGR cooler. That came off pretty easy too. You're probably going to need your little swivel adapter for that bottom one, or just a regular ratcheting 8mm wrench. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find all these bolts that secure the EGR cooler down to probably the engine block and see what happens. Bolts at the front are pretty easy to get to. Same with that one, and there's one all the way back there. Let's try to focus, maybe. That you can get to with the swivel thing. This one is a pain in the ass. So I had to use a couple extensions and then the swivel thing, and had to jam my fingers down here to kind of guide it onto the bolt head. And once I felt that it was secured on there, I was actually able to get that one loosened up. But what might be easier is getting one of these style wrenches that have a hinge right here, rather than just a fixed angled one that can actually rotate, like articulate, and put that down, flatten it out, and then kind of unscrew like that. I didn't have one of those, but that worked for me. It took about 15 minutes to get that one. Now that you have all those bolts out of the EGR, you should be able to just pop it up, and it should be loose. But now down here, going to the wiring harness, there's a little bracket down here with a couple of bolts that looks like need to be undone. Probably 8mm again. So apparently there is another bolt all the way back here. You probably can't even see it, but you have to move the little wiring harness that goes to the computer here. Use a swivel. I have those two normal extensions that I've been using. And then I actually had to take this screwdriver and lay it like kind of parallel with this silver tube right there, and kind of guide the socket up onto the nut, and now I have it secured. So let's fucking break this thing open. But that, oh my god, what a pain in the ass. So I think this is gonna have to come off, because there's no way that this rear part of the EGR cooler is gonna pass this without, I mean, you can try to lift it up as far as you can, but it's, in order to lift and twist that way, it's not, there's too much stuff in the way. And it also feels like there's something connected back there, like a hose or, I don't know, a wire or something. But I'm gonna try to just rip this out one more time before I start unbolting this. So I ended up not having to take this off, but when I looked back here, let's see if I can see it. All the way back here, where, like on the back of the firewall basically, where, let's see if I can find it. Yes, just behind this. Crap. There's a goddamn pipe that connects this. I don't know, it's probably I don't know, some sort of exhaust tube to the back of the cooler. And God, seriously, that's what was holding the entire thing together. Now that I pulled the cooler forward and I'm about ready to get it out, there's also this stuff that's connected on the back that you're gonna have to disconnect. And then there's the other end of that pipe, or the pipe that went to the EGR cooler from that exhaust pipe back here. But I had to squeeze my hands way back here and then take, I think it was a 14 millimeter open-end wrench and kind of loosen it a little bit, and after that you can unscrew it with your fingers and then it should just pop forward. And then you've got to get this rear bolt support over the little plastic and the nut from this black thing on top. So what a pain in the ass though. Okay, cooler's out, and when I pulled it out I got just almost drenched in coolant because well, a bunch of coolant came out of here when I was twisting it to get it out, so be mindful of that. Here's that tube. Oh, there goes a bunch more coolant. Here's that tube that I was explaining about. This was 14 millimeter, I believe. And then on the back of the cooler, this would be towards the back of the truck, towards the firewall. There was some heat shielded wire that went around this. You could seriously just push it off, and because like it's just like a plastic threaded, like a little, like to secure it, it has plastic thread, so you can just slide it off. And I was loosening this, and I don't know if I'm gonna have to reuse this thing or not, but hang on to that. But so this, there was I think a sensor attached to this, and then this was all the way back there. So, but now that it's out, you got a lot of room here, so we'll refer to the instructions as to. So after you get the EGR out, the first step is to put on the factory exhaust block off plate, and you're going to want to reuse the metal gaskets that were on there to begin with. And then this one is threaded for the factory EGT probe, and that is right here, and it's connected underneath the turbo inlet. So I'm gonna tighten that on. I put a little bit of blue thread lock on these. I don't plan on removing them ever again, so I'm probably gonna put a little bit of thread lock on this as well. So next step is to install the coolant block off plate. Underneath the plate there's two O-rings. You want to keep those O-rings on. These bolts are provided in the kit, and they take a 3/16 inch Allen head, and I did put some thread lock on those. Reconnect that metal tube on the back of the firewall, because there's this wiring harness that has all this heat protectant around it. That actually, well, there's the metal tube right there. So there's a sensor that plugs into it, and I think that you need that. So you're going to want to reconnect this hose that we spliced with the barb connector back into the quick connect fitting. Then you're going to want to plug all this back into the computer. The last plate, block off plate that you need to install is this one, and then it goes above the intake. This one has an O-ring on the bottom. You do not have to reuse the factory metal exhaust gasket. Also, you're going to have some of these loose wires here from the EGR. It just says to zip tie this to the PCM harness, and then the vacuum line to zip tie that as well. I actually I lost the little plug somewhere, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to seal this off without that little plug that they provided, because it dropped it somewhere and I can't find it. I ended up zip tying all of those EGR sensors, and then this vacuum tube, I kind of double folded it and zip tied it, so hopefully that helped, or that works. We'll see. I don't know if that will do anything, but And then the EGR temperature sensor I zip tied to this hose right here. And now, finally, we're going to connect this to the radiator on the driver, or on the passenger side, back here, somewhere where it's dripping, and fill it back up with coolant. After you've connected this hose to the radiator, filled here and there with coolant, put this back on up here, and then the intake box, and yeah, hopefully your air filter isn't it's not dirty, that needs to be replaced. So and that should be it. Then we're going to move on to, here's the final product here. I ran this hose underneath the intake here and down to the radiator. Don't forget to plug in the airflow sensor. Got all the plates on, all the bolts tightened down. These are all secured. These connectors, all the EGR sensor wires are tied up. I think we're good. I'm gonna go and double check all these bolts because I did loosen some of them up and I don't want anything to come out. There's a connector that connector's on. Heat shield is covered. There was a bracket that goes from right there, from that like little tube to right there, but it didn't really line up, so I just left it off. I think we're about ready to start on the exhaust.